Today we're bringing you another addition to our catalog of NDP MLAs and candidates known as Meet Your Destroyers. Today we take a look at NDP backbencher Craig Coulihan. Craig Coulihan is a longtime union activist here in Alberta, and in the great catastrophe of the spring of 2015, he was swept into the legislature with, dozens of other inept and underqualified NDP MLAs. Coulihan is the MLA for Calgary-Klein, and he's, of course, running for re-election this spring. Now, like most political watchers of any goodwill, I'm just happy to find out that Coulihan is still alive because he's done very little in the last 4 years, except for when he introduced one piece of highly unnecessary legislation as a backbencher. His bill was an amendment to the Societies Act that would require organizations to have a lawful purpose, meaning groups that advocate for violence or genocide in violation of federal hate speech laws would not be allowed to register as societies here in Alberta. Coulihan's bill targeted white supremacist organizations, but he told the Calgary Herald he wasn't even aware of a specific organization like a white supremacist group that had been applying for society status. Because, of course, the supply of white supremacists just doesn't seem to meet the demand in the NDP world of Alberta. But first, let's talk about Coulihan's social media behavior, just, for a minute, so we can get a feel for the kind of guy he is. He's not good at social media. He tells bad dad jokes that are maybe a little sexist, or so the left claims, like this from 2012. Coulihan is engaging in a conversation with Peter Pilarski, someone I would likely describe as a bit of an anti-union activist, or at least Pilarski was at the time of this conversation with Coulihan. Pilarski says, "You're kidding. A bigger, sloppier union, less likely to control its extremists and more likely to make mistakes." Coulihan says, "Are you describing your mom again, Peter?" Pilarski says, "My mom passed away 4 years ago, and mom jokes are for 12-year-olds. Yes, they are." Now, this very bad and dated and worn-out version of a yo mama joke aside, if a conservative had made this joke, it would be indeed considered ageism, sizeism, and probably slut-shaming. And look, I don't make the rules. Apparently, the left makes all the rules, and they think yo mama jokes are sexist. And I'm not here to say that jokes are sexist or they aren't sexist. You know what? To be honest with you, I don't really care. Jokes are just jokes, even bad ones. And getting uptight about jokes is just, it's dumb. I'm just here to point out the very different treatment that conservatives would get and are getting for saying much of the very same thing that the protected class of the NDP are getting now. But that's not where Coulihan's jokes ended. And this is where getting uptight about jokes, it's probably okay by me. In an exchange with a Twitter user that I would yet again describe as being anti-union, Coulihan tweeted this in 2012, which apparently was a bit of a banner year for Craig. "You're really a good argument for eugenics." Now, eugenics, in short, is the government deciding who can have a child based on a certain set of desirable criteria. It was in vogue in progressive circles in the 20s and 30s, and the Nazis, of course, were heavily into the study of eugenics. There's nothing funny at all about eugenics. It's one of the purest forms of dehumanization to rob someone of their ability to have a family because they were deemed genetically unfit by some government bureaucrat. It's a reduction of the whole of our humanness to a pile of behavioral traits, chemical balances, looks, and genetic material. And I'm not here to attack someone's personal appearance. I really don't like to do that sort of stuff. But like so many advocates of eugenics in our past and our present, I would argue that Houlihan is not the pinnacle of prime human specimen either. There are few things in human history more totalitarian and disgusting as the government deciding who can propagate the species, who is worthy of having children, of loving children and being loved in return, and who is allowed to be in a family. It's an idea that could be taken from a novel about some sort of bizarre dystopian future, but it's actually part of Alberta's past to our very shameful so-called progressive enlightened past. In 1928, the Alberta legislature enacted by overwhelming majority the Sexual Sterilization Act. In order to, what they called, protect the gene pool, the law allowed for forced and sometimes covert sterilization of mentally disabled persons in order to prevent what the government determined to be the transmission of undesirable traits to Alberta offspring. These government-selected so-called undesirable traits were mental illness, developmental delays, epilepsy, alcoholism, pauperism, so the crime of being poor, certain criminal behaviors, and social defects such as prostitution and what they called sexual perversion, so likely homosexuality. The act disproportionately applied to those in socially vulnerable positions, including females, children, unemployed persons, domestic servants. The act was also disproportionately applied to unmarried people, institutionalized persons, Roman and Greek Catholics, and persons of Ukrainian, Native, and Métis ethnicity. I'd have been sterilized a half a dozen times over under this law, but thankfully it was repealed less than a decade before I was born. That's how recent this history is. Many Albertans, some often tragically misdiagnosed as undesirable, found out in adulthood that they couldn't conceive a child because of the actions of the government. This person here, Leilani Muir, was institutionalized in Red Deer at a facility. Years later, she discovered that she had been sterilized covertly by the government when she had an appendectomy as a child. She won nearly $1 million in a civil lawsuit against the province of Alberta, and she deserved every penny. I suppose, like so many good NDPers, Houlihan is a fan of Tommy Douglas's way of doing things. Tommy Douglas, as you know, is the founder of the NDP, and he was a staunch proponent of state-sanctioned sterilization, eugenics, if you will. Douglas's 1933 master's thesis advocated for government sterilization of undesirables to address societal problems. As this National Post article about Tommy Douglas points out, Douglas had a so-called striking embrace in the mid-1930s of forced sterilization and segregation for people of quote-unquote subnormal intelligence and morality. In this respect, I suppose, again, Houlihan is the perfect NDPer, remaining true to the ideals of his founder. After all, these decades of enlightenment later, he's still in the dark ages of believing some people are just more worthy of life than others. Hey, did you know that I have a brand new book out? It's called Stop Notley, and in that book, I make the case for throwing out the NDP. To get a copy of my book, go to stopnotley.com, and while you're there, be sure to sign up for one of our beautiful Stop Notley lawn signs.